Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles, and here's some of the stories we're watching tonight.
If I had known this, I wouldn't have come.
For more than 3 years, the government's been able to quickly deport or expel migrants before they could apply for asylum. That could all change in a matter of hours. And a former Marine will be charged in the New York subway chokehold death of Joran, which was captured on a video seen by millions of people. And nearly 2 decades after Natalie Holloway vanished in Aruba, the prime suspect in the case will be extradited to the United States. Then, in the future of everything,
making AI helpful for everyone is the most profound way we will advance our mission.
AI is coming to Google, and fast. We're going to sit down with one of the tech giants' tech experts. In just a matter of hours, policy at the southern border is going to completely change. But will a change in policy mean a change in the number of people crossing the border every day? In the last 2 days, border officials say more than 22,000 migrants have been detained along the U.S.-Mexico border. And tonight, Title 42 is lifting 1 minute before midnight. That's that pandemic-era border policy that called for migrants to be expelled immediately because of the health crisis. And so far, Mexico says over 2 million migrants were deported to their country during that era, but it hasn't stopped tens of thousands from heading north. A second migrant camp has opened up near Smuggler's Gulch. That's an infamous stretch of land between Baja Tijuana and San Diego. And similar camps have appeared across the Mexico-Texas border. Officials are saying as many as 65,000 migrants are in Mexico right now trying to get to the United States. One 24-year-old migrant from Jamaica said he is running from chaos and looking for safety.
We flee the country because of violence to a small island, and we hear about the border, so we came here to try to seek a better life. But it seemed like it ain't working. I'm just trying to seek a better life. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a violent person.
In Juarez, hundreds lined up at the port of entry to claim asylum. For many, what happens once they get into the United States is not clear. Some migrants from border states have been sent north to cities like Chicago and Philadelphia. New York City has even started sending busloads of migrants to other counties. Today, buses arrived in Newburgh, New York. Another bus from Texas arrived in Washington, D.C. today. 30 migrants were dropped off right outside of Vice President Kamala Harris's house. And this isn't the first time this has happened. The Homeland Security Secretary slammed that move and instead called on Congress to pass a bill for comprehensive immigration reform.
Congress has been unable to pass immigration reform that everyone agrees and understands is desperately needed. We are working with an immigration system that was last reformed in the 1990s. Migration has changed dramatically since then, and we need our laws updated.
And today, the House did pass something, but all but two Republicans voted for a new border security bill, but it doesn't have a chance of passing the Senate, and President Biden doesn't support it. Joining us now from the San Diego border is NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas. Guad, Title 42 changes in just a few hours. Do you think it's going to mean people are about to cross and more people are about to cross, or that the border is going to get a lot more fortified, or do you think it could be both?
Gadi, we're starting off with live images of some of the migrants that continue at this camp. I wanted to show you what things are like right now. This is one of the 2 camps that we know are here between San Diego and Tijuana. You can still see women and children. There's another camp about the same size, a mile away, that we actually hiked it to get a look at. So I think there's 2 different things happening at the same time, Gadi, right? We have a change in immigration policy taking place in the United States. That's going to affect the way CBP operates, the way they process migrants, the way these interviews are conducted, perhaps, and the options that U.S. government officials have to expel migrants and to move forward with that immigration process. Meanwhile, you have something else going on, which is migrants arriving at the border, not necessarily directly an effect of what's happening here, but because of other factors, like according to DHS Secretary Mayorkas, smugglers are taking advantage of the change in policy to take some information, perhaps twist it, and tell migrants now's the time to come to the border. Mexican officials have also told me that smugglers usually take advantage of these situations. And you have news spreading of a change here, and individuals thought this was the best opportunity for them to come to the border. But whether they arrive before Title 42 is lifted or after, only U.S. officials know how that's going to change the way they process them. Once Title 42 is lifted, Gadi, we're not going to go back to the way things were before Title 42 because they've already announced changes to the immigration policy. They've announced new options for them to seek asylum through that CBP One app, and, of course, new ways to expel migrants. So everything's going to be different. Before we had Title 42, we didn't have the crisis in Latin America and some of these countries, political crisis and an economic crisis for some countries. So that's why we have more migrants. So it's a lot of moving pieces. We expect the migrants to continue arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border because we know thousands are in Mexico making their way. And we expect changes to come from the American government officials in the way that they're going to process migrants and the way that the migrants will be able to remain in the U.S. For this asylum-seeking process. But, we're just going to have to see how it goes every single day, especially paying attention to the shelters, Gadi, which are the ones that really help the migrants once they are released in the U.S. to then get to their sponsors or maybe even find them a family or someone that can help them while they remain in the U.S. I do want to point out, Gadi, I spoke with Catholic Charities today with the CEO. They're one of the NGOs that helps migrants. And they did tell me that more than 95% of the migrants that they are helping that are released in the U.S. have sponsors that are going to help them as they go through that asylum-seeking process. Gadi?
And Guad, real quick, I'm just trying to get a sense of where you are. Are you close to an actual border crossing like San Ysidro, or is this near that Smuggler's Gulch where there really is no actual crossing, no place where traditionally you would see migrants turn themselves in for an asylum plea?
Right, Gadi. So before Title 42 was put in place under the old immigration policy, if anyone wanted to seek asylum, they would go to the port of entry, right? And at the port of entry, they would then request asylum for humanitarian reasons. That stopped under Title 42, so migrants began coming to areas like this. So they would irregularly cross into the U.S. and then turn themselves in. I am in between the port of entry. The San Ysidro port of entry is in that direction, over a mile in that direction. It could be more or less, but I can see it in the far distance. Now, you made reference to another area. There's another camp that's about a mile in that direction. So there's two camps. These are camps at the border wall. There's no port of entry here. The port of entry is in this direction. Now, when Title 42 is lifted under the old policy, individuals were allowed to walk up to the port of entry and request asylum. We've seen CBP prepare for a possible rush there, but we haven't seen anything in Tijuana that indicates that migrants would want to rush. What we've seen is migrants enter the United States over the first wall and then stop to turn themselves in. But authorities are prepared for anything that may happen, not just here, but in all of the ports of entry along the U.S.-Mexico border, Gadi.
Fascinating. Guad Vanegas, thanks so much for joining us. Moving now to El Paso. It's one of the many Texas border cities under a state of emergency right now. With shelters full, over 3,000 migrants are living on the streets waiting to be processed. But some families say they are waiting in misery, like the Medina family. They turned themselves into U.S. authorities at the border. But while Mari, the daughter and granddaughter, were processed to let go, Mari's husband was told he'd be deported. Mari has made the decision to go back with her husband and leave her daughter and one-year-old granddaughter behind in hopes that they might have a better life here in the United States.
If I had known this, I wouldn't have come. ¿Por qué dices eso? If I had known, because the separation.
Pues la idea era
because the idea was that we would all come together
y cumplir nuestros sueños todos juntos como lo
and
planeamos.
fulfill our dreams. How are you going to say goodbye? God will give me the strength.
Our thanks to our friend and colleague NBC's Jose Diaz-Balart for those interviews. Joining us now is reporter for the El Paso Times, Lori Vallow. Laura, El Paso is the center of a humanitarian crisis. It's only going to get worse. What's the state of El Paso right now, and how much more can it handle?
Yeah, so the interview that you just passed is really indicative of what's happening here. As you mentioned, there were more than 3,000 migrants living on the street. Many of them had crossed illegally. Most of them were from Venezuela. There was a targeted law enforcement operation here in El Paso on the streets Tuesday and Wednesday. And what happened was agents came in and invited first migrants to turn themselves in if they were going to seek asylum, to show up at a Border Patrol station and basically try to get right with the law. But there was no guarantee that everybody was going to be released with a notice to appear. And as you saw with the interview that Jose did, families apparently are being split in that way. So, some may have been released to area shelters. Area shelters are not 100% full, but what you were seeing just a few days ago were migrants who didn't have any paperwork. And so the shelters could not take them in, not the city and not the NGOs either. Tonight, as you mentioned, Title 42 expires, and we're seeing a massive transformation of border enforcement at this moment.
And our colleague, Tom Yamas, spoke to people who live in El Paso. Here's what some of them had to say. I want to play that.
I don't think that they should let them come across. I really don't, because we already have enough populated up here.
It's okay. Like, they haven't done anything to me. If they come to work, that's okay. If they do something, then that's an issue then.
Last week I passed by, and they were just in the streets. It makes our city look dirty. It really does. I mean, it's a border town, but it's never been like that.
It's a border town, and I know in the last few weeks some neighborhoods have held public safety meetings. This is something that the people in El Paso have dealt with on some level for quite some time. But what we're seeing today, what are you hearing from people who live in El Paso?
It's very interesting hearing from people in El Paso now. El Paso is a city of immigrants. Almost everyone here can trace their roots to another country, often Mexico. But, as you're hearing, people are growing more tired, although this city has often thrown its arms open to shelter everyone who comes through. Most people don't stay here. They move on to cities in the interior like Denver, Chicago, New York, Washington. And the city has been historically very welcoming. But with the numbers that we've seen in recent months and the strain that the city has been under to shelter everyone who comes, folks are, seeing the unhoused migrants on the street. It's affecting daily life. It's affecting people who need to go downtown or who attend the Sacred Heart Church, where many people were sheltered. You are also, as you mentioned, seeing migrants cross unlawfully in this region, and they're running through neighborhoods, they're running through parks, they're running through backyards, and Border Patrol is engaging in chases. It's been a shift, and I think that sentiment around immigration may also be shifting in El Paso.
Fascinating. Laura, thanks so much for joining us. And breaking just a few hours ago out of New York, charges are expected to be filed tomorrow in the case of that deadly chokehold on the city subway. And officials are saying that Daniel Penny will be charged with second-degree manslaughter for the death of street performer Jordan Neely. According to a spokesperson for the Manhattan District Attorney, 24-year-old Penny is expected to be arraigned in Manhattan criminal court tomorrow. Now, this comes after Neely's family, politicians, and protesters have called for criminal charges to be brought after Neely's death on May 1st. Joining us now from downtown Manhattan is NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk. Stephanie, at first, Penny was brought in for questioning, then he was released. What happened since?
Yeah, well, I mean, Gadi, an investigation happened, right? I mean, they talked to people on the train. We have seen some of the video clips. And also during that time, there has been a lot of pressure on officials to bring criminal charges. There have been protests, the most recent of which shut down a subway line over the weekend. We had heard from our sources that this case was going to be reviewed by the grand jury. That would have prolonged the process. This decision from the district attorney to charge Penny with manslaughter in the second degree now means that he's basically skipped that process of a grand jury. Gadi?
And Steph, any word from Penny or his lawyers?
All we have is one statement from Penny's attorneys, and in that statement, he said that his client, this was a few days ago, said his client acted in self-defense and that he and other riders on that train were, quote, aggressively threatened by Jordan Neely that day. And he said that Jordan Neely's death was accidental. We reached out to that attorney for more comment now that we know there's going to be a criminal charge, and we haven't heard back. Gadi?
Stephanie Gosk, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And back in 2005, the disappearance of Alabama teenager Natalie Holloway gripped the nation almost 20 years later. And tonight, we've got a big update to share. The man she was last seen with, Joran Vandersloot, is expected to be extradited to the United States. Now, keep in mind, Vandersloot was never charged in her disappearance, but he still landed behind bars for the murder of another woman in 2010 in Peru. And now federal prosecutors are indicting him with fresh charges of extortion and wire fraud, saying he tried to extort Holloway's family with promises that he would lead them to her body. She's never been found. And NBC's Kristen Dahlgren has more.
Tonight, Natalie Holloway's family hoping to finally get some justice for the 18-year-old who was on a high school graduation trip to Aruba when she vanished in 2005.
There is still no sign of American Natalie Holloway.
In a case that made headlines around the world, Joran Vandersloot, who police say left a club with Natalie the night she was last seen, can now be extradited to the U.S. To face federal charges, he tried to extort $250,000 from the teen's mother in 2010. Vandersloot was never charged in Holloway's disappearance, but is currently serving a 28-year sentence after pleading guilty to killing Stephanie Flores in Peru on the 5-year anniversary of Holloway's disappearance. That country's new president now agreeing to the temporary extradition. Joyce Vance is the former U.S. attorney who signed Vandersloot's indictment back in 2010.
Without a body, a murder prosecution wasn't possible. It may never be possible. But this is still a form of justice for Natalie Holloway.
Vandersloot is accused of offering to tell Natalie's family how she died and where she was buried in exchange for the money. Authorities say he was given an initial payment of $25,000.
He took her attorney to a site he said the body was located at, but the body wasn't there, and he subsequently acknowledged that in emails.
An attorney for Vandersloot tells the Associated Press they will fight extradition. But in a statement, Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway, wrote in part, "The persistence of many is going to pay off. Together, we are finally getting justice for Natalie."
So the big question now, of course, when might we see Joran Vandersloot in an American courtroom? Well, it's still unclear. If his attorney decides to fight the extradition, like he has said he will, it could take some time. But if he doesn't, we're hearing that we may see Vandersloot within the U.S. and in court in about a week or so. Gadi?
Thanks, Kristen. And we've got much more in store for you this hour. The jury's got the case in Idaho against the so-called doomsday mom. Dana Griffith is going to be here in a few minutes to break down the closing arguments against Lori Vallow. And later, we've got more from both sides of the southern border wall as Title 42 comes to an end. More on how the U.S. cities nearby are getting ready for the stream of migrants that's expected. Stick around. And now it's time for a quick look at some of the other headlines we are following tonight. The government has just released new videos from January 6th, and these ones show a different view of the Senate floor during the Capitol attack. These were recorded by a remotely operated camera and were released in connection with the sentencing of one of the rioters. And a former gymnastics coach was arrested in Florida for allegedly sexually assaulting minors while working as a coach in Michigan. 49-year-old Shannon Guy is charged with over a dozen counts of criminal sexual conduct. The victims were between the ages of 4 and 14 at the time. And Peloton has announced it's recalling more than 2 million of its stationary bikes over safety concerns. Now, this recall is for the original Peloton model bike sold from January 2018 to May of this year. Now, the seats can apparently break off as the bike while someone is on it, causing people to fall and get hurt. And the Consumer Product Safety Commission says customers should immediately stop using the recalled bikes and reach out to the company for a free repair. Twitter CEO Elon Musk says he is stepping down, tweeting out that he has hired a new person to oversee the business, not naming her, but saying she'll start in 6 weeks. He says he'll switch to a product and tech-focused role. And today marks the end of a 3-year-long public health emergency in the United States in response to the COVID pandemic. The Biden administration has decided to let that emergency expire now that deaths and hospitalizations in the United States have gone down significantly. Did Lori Vallow murder her children? That is the question an Idaho jury is deliberating right now after both sides gave their closing arguments earlier today. Now, Vallow is pleading not guilty to murdering her youngest kids, Joshua, who was 7, and Tylee, who was 16. The kids disappeared for a month back in 2019 before police found their bodies buried on a property belonging to the kids' stepdad and Vallow's new husband, Chad Daybell. Now, during this trial, we've seen Vallow's lawyers allege that Chad Daybell is a cult leader, and we know that he and Lori got married 2 weeks after his last wife died of asphyxiation. And according to the prosecution, we also know that Lori collected her kids' Social Security survivor benefits from their biological fathers even after they died. NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin joins us now for this wild story. Dana, they could have gone home. The jury is still deliberating right now. What does that say?
It could be very telling. Last update we got was about an hour ago, so that was about 5:30 local time there, that they took a 15-minute dinner break. Normally at 4 o'clock, court is wrapping up. Let's come back tomorrow. But the fact that they are taking this dinner break means that maybe they're close to a decision. But with juries, you never can tell what they're going to do, even with the amount of evidence that is laid out in this case. If they go home tonight, we'll be back up first thing in the morning to try to learn what's going to happen tomorrow. We know throughout this 5-week trial, it has been closed to cameras. No one has been able to see it except for those that are live in person. But we know that it will be live streamed. So once the verdict comes in, we can watch that much anticipated reaction.
What do you think is going to be the evidence that is top of mind for this jury?
Well, the big thing is the fact that these kids' bodies were found on Chad Daybell's property. Now, remember, Lori is also facing conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, so it doesn't mean that she had to kill them. They claim that, conspiracy is just as bad as actually doing the act itself. Prosecutors also pointed out the fact that a piece of her hair was found on the duct tape that was wrapped around young J.J. Vallow's mouth. So they say that she had something to do with it possibly. And even if she didn't, the fact that she was kind of the key, Chad Daybell's new wife, her brother Alex Cox, who was also brought into this fold and possibly having something to do with it. Those two had the GPS locations on that property near those burial sites, not Lori. That's what her defense was trying to say, is that, hey, she didn't have anything to do with this. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Speaking of Chad Daybell, he has been charged with murder as well, but his trial has not started yet. And yet we saw Lori's lawyers kind of antagonizing him throughout this trial and, accusing him of being a cult leader. How is that going to play into this?
Well, they're trying to say that they used religion, this fringe religious beliefs about how he thought that he was going to be, the next Messiah, essentially, and that he was trying to, get this army of people that they were going to carry over after the end of the world. And they had this sort of judging system of rating people who they considered zombies and dark spirits, and that they said these kids had dark spirits. So they're trying to say that this, alleged cult leader and Lori, who was also a part of this, used their religious beliefs to justify murder.
And however this ends, it sounds like it's going to be live streamed. So this is something that we can all
tune in.
Together.
It'll be much anticipated to see how she reacts. She's in court. She's been, pretty lively at times. She cried during the trial. There was one point where her attorneys asked the judge for her to be out of the courtroom so she didn't have to see some of those graphic images of the kids' bodies. But the judge said no, she should have to sit here and be a part of this. So it'll be interesting to see what the verdict is and what will be the reaction.
Dana Griffin, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And coming up next, when you're driving, you ever feel like the cars driving past you have lights so bright you can barely see in front of you? Well, it's not just you. That is an actual thing, and the tech to prevent those crazy glares already exists, but for some reason, it's not available here in the United States. We're going to explain. But first, you got to see this. Meet TJ. He is the first Filipino-American to move onto Sesame Street in perfect timing for AAPI Heritage Month. He's talking now to Cal Penn about confidence.
TJ, how do you show your confidence?
Oh, well,
I'm learning Tagalog. It's a language my Filipino family speaks, and I have confidence because I can always ask my Lola for help when I don't know a word.
So nice to know that no matter how old you are, you can always ask anyone how to get to Sesame Street. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. Border officials are preparing for a mass influx of migrants at the southern border. Title 42, which went into effect during the pandemic and allowed border agents to immediately expel migrants, ends tonight, 1 minute before midnight. And jury deliberations started today in the Lori Vallow trial. She's accused of killing her 2 children back in 2019. Vallow has pled not guilty. And Twitter is getting a new CEO. Elon Musk says the unnamed woman will start in 6 weeks. Musk will move to a new role overseeing product and tech. And with just hours to go until Title 42 ends, tens of thousands of migrants are trying to get to the United States. And for those who do get to the United States, many are searching for shelter in border communities like El Paso, where city and charity organizations say they are stretching resources as far as they can. Here's the mayor of El Paso.
We prepared for days. We prepared for weeks. The city of El Paso, we don't do immigration law. We're here to protect our visitors, but also make sure that the community of El Paso stays and continues to be safe.
What keeps you up at night?
You know, what keeps me up at night, I always tell people, is the lack of light.
What do you mean, the lack of light?
Well, because I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, and there is no end game.
Julio Vaquero, the anchor of Noticias Telemundo, joins us now from El Paso. Julio, thank you so much for joining us. The policy will change, but people are still coming. What do you think is going to happen along the border overnight tonight?
Hey, Gadi. Yes, people are still coming. So basically, once Title 42 ends, we're going back to what we had before the pandemic, which technically is called Title 8. What that means is that people who are still coming and who try to cross the border after midnight, when Title 42 is lifted, they will be processed by immigration authorities, and they will determine if they should stay or they can stay with an asylum, or if they have to go back and be deported. Basically, that's one part of it. And the other is that most of the people who are trying to come into the United States seeking asylum, they will need to ask for asylum in other countries before they get to the United States, one of them being Mexico, or seek asylum through an application called CBP-1, which is another legal pathway that authorities are offering migrants who want to come to the United States. That's a big difference between what we have right now, where migrants are coming in and being expelled immediately, no questions asked under Title 42, and what will happen after that, which is they will be processed by authorities.
And Julio, how are Mexican authorities and United States authorities working together right now to handle the change in policy? We were talking yesterday to Guad Venegas. He said that after the fire that we saw near the border, a lot of border officials and migration officials in Mexico kind of took their hands off a little bit. At least that's what they were hearing from some of the nonprofits down in Tapachula, Mexico. Is there a lot of cooperation right now between Mexico and the United States in terms of dealing with migrants in Mexico?
Well, you know, both governments announced something that really has no precedent, and that is that non-Mexican immigrants will be deported to Mexico starting tomorrow. Mexico will be receiving thousands of migrants from Venezuela, from Nicaragua, from Cuba. That hadn't happened before. I'm talking about deportations. So it's not like being expelled like they have been through Title 42, but a deportation per se. That's a first. And it is important because, you know, I talked to Secretary Mayorkas the other day, and I asked him that. I mean, the fire in Ciudad Juarez, wasn't that enough evidence just to show that Mexican authorities are not prepared to receive as many migrants being deported from the United States? He just said that this is a regional problem and that both countries have to work together to try and solve this problem.
So people not from Mexico being deported from Mexico. Fascinating. I do want to ask one other thing, Julio. As people in Latin America, all over Latin America, see the images of what's happening at the border, What do you think that they are seeing? Are they seeing images of people getting into the United States and finding opportunity, or do you think that they see the images that are being shown and see people being turned away and see hopelessness?
You know, Gadi, it's hard to know. I think there's a lot of confusion among migrants. We've talked to many of them, and some of them believe that Title 42 was an opportunity for them to come in an easier way, and some of them think that it will be more difficult after Title 42. And there are so many versions and concepts and ideas that and rumors between these migrants. So at the end of the day, Gadi, most of the migrants we've seen here, probably 90% of them come from Venezuela. So they are escaping a dictatorship, they are escaping poverty and a terrible situation in their own country. And at the end, they will continue to try to seek an opportunity and a better life in the United States as long as there are jobs in the United States. So that's the magnet that's pulling them. And there are jobs that need to be filled in construction, in agriculture. So they will try to get this opportunity in the United States as long as the situation in their own country is as it is right now. These images, I don't think they will really stop them from trying.
Julio Vaquero, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Your coverage out there, every night we watch Telemundo, and your coverage has really set the bar for all of us. Thanks so much, brother. And with Title 42 ending, there has been a lot of focus on policy decisions, but there's also a lot of focus that should be put on Good Samaritans in so many communities that are trying to lend a hand. Bailey Miller with our NBC affiliate here in Los Angeles has a report.
Estamos trabajando ya, preparando el viaje para Tijuana.
A coalition of charities across Los Angeles are teaming up. They're packing up these necessities and getting ready to take them to Tijuana.
Prepare a bag for a boy, for a girl, and for a man and a woman. So we know. We form an alliance and we give it to them.
Walter Batres is the president of La Red Migrante Centroamericana. It's a nonprofit, and it's just one of the charities working to fulfill the mission of helping migrant families. They fill up 500 of these blue bags each month and transport them.
¿Dónde estás poniendo las camisas ahí?
But now with Title 42 set to expire and a surge of migrants at the border, there's a bigger need now more than ever.
We really have seen the necessity in all kind of cases, real strong cases of people real fleeing for their lives. This is not regular people that want to migrate just because they want to come to Hollywood. These are people that really are fleeing their country, saving their lives and the lives of their children.
The Los Angeles charities have relationships with a dozen shelters in Mexico. Each one they work with houses more than 1,000 women and children in need, waiting with sometimes no idea what comes next. This is why they say they do what they do.
Bailey Miller from KNBC, thanks so much. Now, if you've noticed that headlights seem more bright and more glaring, it is not in your head. Newer LED headlights are blinding people with their glare and even causing some people to crash. NBC's Vicki Nguyen looks into why this is happening and gives us a preview of how a lot of those bright lights could start fading soon.
Hey there, you have likely experienced it yourself. Bright headlights shining into your rearview mirror or blinding you from oncoming traffic. Well, now regulators in Europe have found a solution. So why are we so behind here in the United States? And what you can do now to stay safe on the road.
I couldn't see anything.
Ashanti Collins was driving at night in May of 2021 when she says blinding lights from an oncoming car caused her to crash.
I woke up on the side of the road in my car.
She was airlifted to a hospital to treat a broken arm and dislocated wrist. Social media is filled with videos of blinding headlights.
I can't even see. I'm like literally getting blinded from the guy's headlights behind me.
The light does look much brighter.
Scientist John Bolo says older headlights use halogen bulbs, which have a softer orange color, but newer ones are bluish white.
I'm going to look at the warm light just to kind of get a sense. Okay, yeah, it's bright. Let me see what the LED light does. Oh, this one for sure. Much, much brighter. It hurts my eyes, and actually, I'm still seeing the spots from it. Why is it that they appear brighter?
Well, our eyes are more sensitive to blue light.
He shows me how the issue is magnified when a headlight is out of alignment, a common problem.
Wow, so the LEDs are already quite bright, but when they're tilted up, you can't see anything else. This would be very dangerous if I were driving. An NBC News analysis found only 10 states require annual inspections for proper headlight alignment. Automakers say they have a solution: adaptive headlight technology. What did these lights do?
Well, instead of thinking of a static light like a low beam and a high beam, think of it as a projector.
And it's not blinding other people.
And it's not blinding other people.
I saw firsthand how adaptive headlights work. Wow, I can see everything. This experience of driving at night is completely different and so much better. I feel like a safer driver. They even highlight my lane without affecting other drivers. Okay, so this car
now he got
in front of me.
And notice how it's got a shadow on him now.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. The technology has been in use in Europe for a decade, and automakers say they hope to have it on U.S. vehicles within 5 years. Do you think this technology is life-saving?
Absolutely.
And get this, adaptive headlights have been in use in Europe and several other countries for about a decade now. But automakers and safety experts say red tape here in the U.S. means it could be years before we see this technology allowed on cars here. We have an in-depth article about why it's taken so long on today.com.
Future's looking bright, just not too bright. Vicki Nguyen, thanks so much. And coming up, rapid heart rate, fainting, and dizziness. Those are some of the symptoms associated with a life-changing condition called POTS, and a lot more people seem to be getting it after COVID. Dr. Sayel takes a look when we come back. Welcome back. Let's get around the world in 80 seconds. The World Health Organization says Mpox is no longer a global health emergency. That's a virus they call monkeypox. It spread over to 100 countries last year, and around 90,000 cases were reported. At least 140 people died. And Pakistan's Supreme Court has ordered former Prime Minister Imran Khan to be released from jail, calling his detention illegal. When he was arrested earlier this week on corruption charges, it was met with protests, and today's decision comes just a few days after some of the worst political violence the country has seen in decades. At least 8 people have been killed. And a van carrying oxygen tanks exploded in Italy today, right in the center of Milan. A school was evacuated along with an apartment building close by. Incredibly, firefighters say only the driver of that van was hurt. They say he burned his hand trying to put out the flames. As of right now, we don't know what caused the explosion. And hopes for a truce might be fading between Israel and Palestine. Today, airstrikes in the Gaza Strip killed a pair of Palestinian commanders, while a rocket fired from Gaza hit a 4-story apartment building in Israel, causing the first death inside Israel during this current wave of fighting. So far, according to reports, 28 Palestinians have been killed, with at least 10 civilians, mostly women and children, among the dead. And NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez has more.
Intensive diplomatic efforts led by Egypt are underway to try to broker a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant group. But for now, the fighting continues. The Israeli military says some 800 rockets have been fired over the last 2 days. And earlier tonight, one of them scored a direct hit on an apartment building in the Israeli city of Rehovot, killing an elderly man. That is the first fatality on the Israeli side. Now, the picture is much bloodier inside Gaza. At least 29 Palestinians have been killed so far, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. That number includes 2 senior commanders from Palestinian Islamic Jihad who were killed in rapid succession by Israeli strikes earlier today, but also a growing number of civilian casualties, including at least 6 small children. Now, Palestinians today are marking and mourning those deaths, but they are also mourning and marking the 1-year anniversary of the death of Shireen Abu Akleh, the veteran Palestinian-American Al Jazeera correspondent who was killed last year in the occupied West Bank. You'll remember Israel eventually acknowledged that it was likely that it was one of its soldiers who fired the fatal shot. But as of yet, there has been no accountability 1 year on. No one has been prosecuted, and the Israeli military has not announced any discipline for any of its soldiers. That is a source of deep frustration for Shireen Abu Akleh's family, but also for a number of Democrats in Congress. I spoke earlier this week to Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who has been a leading voice on this issue. Take a listen to what he had to say.
What we're looking here for is transparency. We just need to get all the facts. We need cooperation from all the witnesses. It needs to be independent, and that should lead to some form of accountability in the shooting death of an American citizen and prominent journalist.
Now, Shireen Abu Akleh was an American citizen, and the FBI has opened an investigation into her death. But as far as we can tell, that probe is making little progress. FBI agents have not yet spoken to key Palestinian witnesses who were with Abu Akleh on the day she was killed, and the Israeli military is refusing to cooperate with the FBI's investigation. Back to you.
Raf Sanchez, thanks so much. Now, a lot of us know about the complications of long COVID, but what's getting less attention is another life-changing condition linked to COVID called POTS. And millions of Americans are suffering from it while doctors still don't seem to completely understand what's going on. NBC's medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal has more.
For Jillian, symptoms started in June of last year.
I would stand up and immediately feel dizzy and lightheaded.
When you finally look at a calendar and start putting things together, you realize, wow, all of this started after she got COVID in June.
What Jillian and between 1 to 3 million Americans have is a life-changing condition called POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Basically, it's a condition that can cause some scary symptoms, including dizziness, fainting, brain fog, heart palpitations, and fatigue, amongst others. And most cases are actually diagnosed in younger women in their 20s and 30s.
What is it like for these patients? What are they telling you? How is it affecting their lives?
It affects their life in a very significant way. So if you think about it, if you're tired all day long, if you cannot stand up for a long time or walk around for a long time, unfortunately they stop working or they have to probably go part-time from full-time. Their life is significantly affected by diseases.
Dr. Tae Chung directs the POTS Center at Johns Hopkins University and is a world-renowned expert in the field. Many of the patients who come to him struggle for years to get an explanation for their symptoms.
Just having a diagnosis is incredibly powerful. Until they get diagnosed with POTS, their symptoms are often dismissed by many healthcare providers, and they're very frustrated.
For Jillian, POTS symptoms made performing in marching band that much harder as she couldn't stand for a long time without feeling dizzy or lightheaded. Her case is not unusual. Scientists are saying there's been a rise in POTS since the pandemic, as the coronavirus is believed to play a role. Data shows that up to 14% of COVID survivors can develop the condition.
More than just about a year waiting list before COVID pandemic. Now, after COVID pandemic, my waiting list has gone more than 2 years.
The issue is, POTS isn't very well understood yet, and diagnosis and treatment can take months.
We're going to start the tilt.
POTS is typically diagnosed using a special test called a tilt table, where a patient lies on a table to see how different positions affect their heart rate and blood pressure.
Now you can see 2 different monitors here. Your heart rate went by just less than 10 points, which is very normal. Although you feel like you feel a little went up there, but it's completely normal.
So it went up by 10 points. In a POTS patient, what would you see there?
I would say definitely more than 30 to 40 points up from their baseline.
Not only is a special test typically used, there's a shortage of doctors who actually know how to care for people with POTS. In the U.S., there are only about 100 clinics specializing in this condition, and we don't yet have effective treatments besides hydration and a high-salt diet. But for Jillian, her best advice to those struggling, advocate for your own health, especially if you feel dismissed.
My biggest message is just to listen to yourself and not let other people dictate who you are or how you're feeling.
Dr. Akshay Syal, thanks so much. And before we go, the future of everything. They say competition fuels innovation, and just when you thought GPT was the king of the AI race, Google comes thundering in. And if you're one of those people that are like, oh, AI, I don't use this stuff, yeah, you might want to stick around, because we are about to show you how it's going to be popping up in a lot of things you use every single day. So stay tuned. And today, in the future of everything, you know when we don't know something and we say, oh, I'll just Google it. It's something that we say every day on the regular without a second thought. But if you would have heard yourself saying that like 20 years ago, you probably would have thought it sounded crazy. Google is a weird word. And recently I was on a college campus and heard some students say, oh, I'll just GPT it. Yeah, you know where this is going. We are in the middle of an AI arms race that heats up more and more every day. And now Google is unveiling so many new AI features, your head's going to spin, all using one phrase over and over. Take a listen.
The shift with AI is as big as they come.
We can see the true potential of AI as a collaborator.
A personalized and private AI model using our AI platform, Vertex AI.
You get the idea. So what do these fancy features look like? There is an AI upgrade to Google Maps, a real-time weather and traffic conditions presented all in a 3D world, and then something called a universal translator in case you're watching a video in a language you don't understand. Check out what it looks like.
What many college students don't realize is that knowing when to ask for help and then following through on using helpful resources is actually a hallmark of becoming a productive adult.
Muchos universitarios no comprenden que saber cuándo pedir ayuda y usar recursos útiles es en realidad una clave para convertirse en un adulto productivo.
Did you see her mouth was moving in the same way on the second video? All that shiny stuff does not come without a warning, though. In fact, there are some disclaimers all over the website for Google's chatbot Bard. The word experiment is the first thing you see at the top of the page. And one of the biggest differences between OpenAI and Google's Bard is that most people can't use GPT to search the internet in real time. GPT was cut off back in 2021. Bard, however, is fully dialed into the internet for everyone. With us now is Justin Burr. He's a technology expert from Google itself. Justin, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the future of everything. A lot of people have been using GPT, and they're excited about finally having AI connected straight to the internet. And then you got people wondering if real-time access as a beta to the internet from Google is moving too fast. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an exciting time for sure. And we've integrated generative AI experiences now into search, as you just mentioned. So think of going to Google search and having more of an intuitive and natural conversation, just like you would be doing with your best friend if your best friend happened to know all of the information that's out on the open internet. And you've heard this phrase quite a bit. We're moving boldly, but we're moving responsibly. We introduced our AI principles back in 2018. We've been slow playing a lot of this generative AI release into the public because we want to get it right. And so, yeah, things are moving quickly in the world of AI, but we're going slow and we're being responsible with how we do it.
Another pretty interesting announcement is this idea of watermarking. This is a big deal because there's a lot of concern about knowing what is real and what is AI generated. What is watermarking and how are you guys building these safeguards?
Yeah, we're going to do a watermark. We're also going to do with metadata as well, because as you mentioned, there can be a proliferation of misinformation, and we're building this generative AI content. And sometimes it's difficult to tell what's actually a real photo and what's been generated by AI. So we're going to have watermarking and we're going to have metadata attached to that generative AI content so that people can know what is real and what isn't, because we need to inform the public in that way.
And I've been using Bard a lot. I've been using ChatGPT a lot to help kind of research things. So I got to say, we asked Bard about how AI will play into the controversy of several states accusing Google of antitrust practices. So I want to read you a part of the response from your AI chatbot, because I got to give it to you. It did not seem to hold back very much. It said, quote, AI could be used by Google to further its monopoly power in the tech industry, or it could be used to level the playing field and give smaller companies a chance to compete. Okay, so if those two scenarios are two ends of the spectrum, where do you think Google lands?
Yeah, it's a good question, and thanks, Bard, for that. Well, Bard is an experiment, and it'll get better with time. But I do like that answer. I mean, it's balanced. It lets the individual kind of learn from what the information is being surfaced, and they can come up with their own takeaway. So it's not coming up with a very hard stance, and it's allowing the individual to do what they want with that information.
Time for another question. Out of all these features, what's the new AI tool here that you think might be the next, like, Google verb?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the generative AI stuff in search is great. It's a great way to have a natural conversation with folks. I do think maybe with the Bard experience, it's can be something, hey, just Bard it. But I also think that the generative AI stuff across all of our different products in workspace, across translation, it's going to be something that is proliferating across all the products to make it more helpful. So it might not become a verb, but it's definitely going to have a lot of benefit in your daily life.
Okay, so just as we were doing that, sorry, I had to do it one more time. Ask Bard, what are the dangers of connecting Bard to the internet in real time and beta testing to everyone? It gave me a few different answers here, but one was the potential for Bard to be used to spread misinformation and disinformation. I mean, what are the safeguards that are going into effect? A lot of people would say, like, Google is the internet these days, and now to see AI infused in this type of search result, like what safeguards are we talking about?
So to take a step back for a second, Bard is a standalone experiment. That is not integrated in search just yet. We've integrated some generative AI capabilities through search labs. So this is a waitlisted only type of experiment right now within labs. And if you go to Google, you can go to the top right corner, click on the beaker, and then join the waitlist. So we're moving slow with this, and we're getting it out there in a responsible way. And we need to get it out there, though, because we can't innovate in a vacuum. You need to have user feedback. You need to get these tools out in the community and see how people are using it, because we can't do this without that type of user feedback. So that's essential in this moving forward.
So right here, do I give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
That's up to you.
All right, Justin Burr, thanks so much for joining us, brother.
Thanks for having me.
And that does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.